Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Noxcast, your Equinox News Recap Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Hope. I'm the managing executive editor of the Equinox.
And I'm Chloe, the news editor. Today we're joined by Charlotte, our webmaster.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Former Noxcast host Charlotte is back on, and you talked a little bit before when we had you on, shortly after you became webmaster, I believe, talked a little bit about that role and sort of how things shifted for you, but we are both seniors, so we're both going to be graduating, but in particular with you, webmaster is a really important role that we do have to fill and keep up with the posting, so if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've had a lot of fun with Webmaster, but it definitely, I think sometimes we don't even think about, and I know I didn't think about before I took on the role, like how essential it is to daily operations to like make sure everything is posted in a timely manner so that we can get it up on social media, get it in front of people, and also just have somebody who can be like kind of the dedicated go-between, because obviously we're working with a lot of different companies to make sure that the site is like up and maintained and that everything is as it should be, because if we don't have a site, then we are kind of screwed in a lot of ways. I mean, the paper is great. We love the print paper, and I think that reaches its own sort of dedicated audience, but without the website, like you're just lacking the central engine of what allows us to like inform people about what's going on campus in a timely manner, and timeliness being one of the news values that is taught here in the journalism courses we all have taken, is one of the core things that we're trying to prioritize as a news organization. So it is a really essential role, but it's also pretty fun because you get to kind of see the nuts and bolts and the kind of underbelly of the website that is, again, so central to what we do. It definitely is, it's time consuming, it's a lot to make sure that with every post, like, I've got the headline, subhead, photo caption, photo credit, article, author name, which section it goes in, the appropriate tags, categories, everything. Like, everything has to be just right and whatever. And that can take time, but it's very rewarding when it's all sort of, when I get like a full section posted and everything is like lined up, that feels good, So I'm really hoping that somebody who shares kind of the combination that I have of like really understanding the value of the news and those journalistic sort of values that we hold to. Like, again, I can't stress enough that timeliness, but also kind of the like slightly different brand of like being a nerd, which is just really liking websites and web design and just the internet, and like being able to kind of dive into like WordPress and some of the plugins that we use to make everything like aesthetically appealing, but also just very clean, very easy to read. We want it to be as accessible as possible. So, I mean, if there's anybody out there that fits that description, hit me up, webmaster@kscequinox.com. And I'll work with you. It's not that difficult. That's the big thing. Like it is time consuming at points, but once you get in the rhythm of it, it's just like bop bop bop. This goes there. It's really it's easy. So let me know.
Well said, and also not to mention how cool it would look on a resume to say, I managed the website of an award-winning. I mean, it's one of the things that consistently wins us awards at every single organization that we submit for. We recently placed third in Best of Show for campuses under 15,000 students in the Fall National Convention, which is the first time, and I don't even know how long, that we've been on like the podium when it comes to websites of, considering a campus of our size, which is like 2,700 students or so, going up against those with 15,000 nationally, and then still being in the upper echelon. It's really cool, and I think, the way our website is set up it is like simplistic and it doesn't require a lot of like prior experience with like coding and things like that. So it's really quite easy to grasp, like you said. And so I would encourage anyone to think about it. You don't have to be like a computer science person necessarily at all.
Which I am not.
Yeah. So do think about it. But the second reason why I wanted to have you on is because the past week, the breaking news came out about a professor in the management department who was denied reentry into the United States. This happened back in December after he had gone on a vacation cruise with his family. And so in Florida, he was denied reentry back into the U.S. and has since been in China. And this was something that had been brewing, and we'd been working on it for a while. We got a tip back in December about it, and only just recently got the crucial confirmation in order to be able to publish. So just want to give you the space to sort of talk about the reporting on that. It's definitely, I think, the biggest story of the year so far from us.
Yeah, it's been it's been quite the process to sort of just wrap our heads around what we were looking at and how to proceed with reporting on it. And you know, we had a lot of conversations about just like what information we thought we could realistically get and from where, but you know, we also didn't want to, with big stories like this, you don't want to rush into it. You know, you don't want to go in and just start asking anybody anything, you know, like without sort of that level of care, because you can cause a lot of stress and panic where it just is not needed, and especially where this is such a sensitive topic, with, you know, how active immigration enforcement has been, you know, ICE and just like Homeland Security in general. You know, it's hard to talk about. So I had started working on this. You know, we kind of picked up investigation with this properly a couple weeks ago, I want to say. And it was just kind of a process of retracing our steps, you know, figuring out who might know something. And so I tried to figure out, you know, potentially payroll information, you know, because being at a public college, that's the kind of information that is often public. And so if we could sort of figure out what the status might be for this professor in particular, we could maybe get confirmation about whether or not he was here. And so that would at least lead us somewhere. And we didn't end up getting any super specific information about that, but that sort of led me up kind of the chain of command, to eventually speaking with the university system office, which is where through Lisa Thorne, who's the director of communications there, was the one who eventually got me that answer of confirming that this had happened, and to whom and where, and when, at least roughly. And, you know, I mean, we went through a lot of other processes of just trying to be like, okay, you know, maybe this person who has worked with him in some capacity might know something, or maybe this person who works with faculty in general might know, like the president of the union, who's also quoted in the article, you know, and we kind of, it's a difficult thing because there's a lot of people who there were a lot of people who didn't want to talk to me. You know, I got a few sort of denials, or, you know, in some cases just like, you know, not responding or kind of shrugging it off. And I think, you know, there was sort of the question of the importance of putting this out into the open. You know, some people made the argument that this isn't something that we should, you know, poke our noses into and figure out more about. But the more that I heard that, the more sure I became that it was something that we absolutely had to publish, because especially with the climate that we're in right now, where it's such a scary time, and so many people are being scooped up by immigration enforcement at a moment's notice, and just nobody knows what happened to them. There's not a trace, and you have communities that are left wondering where their people are going. you know to if we were to have just said, we don't want to dig into this, we don't want to cause any trouble, we're just going to let this go, then nobody ends up knowing what's going on. Nobody ends up knowing what the facts of the situation are, and that doesn't help anyone, least of all the professor in question, because we're just living in the dark and hoping that this issue is going to go away, that it's going to stop being something we hear about. And that's not how, that isn't how the world works. These things don't go away on their own. You have to face it and talk about it and confront it and understand what's happening in order to deal with it and go about your life.
Right, yeah. And I did want to give you a chance also, Chloe, to speak about it, since you were looped in kind of early on to the communications, like the email threads, and sort of saw the development of the reporting a little bit before it ultimately came to the breaking news point. So if you want to talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when this was first brought to our attention over winter break in December, and we got that email from one of our advisors, and it was very upsetting. And it was even more upsetting that we didn't really have an answer about who it was or if rumors are even true for a very long time. And I'm glad we were able to publicize the information, what happened to him and his family. But as you were talking to, it does make me upset how difficult it was to obtain that information and that some people were not willing to speak about it. I think, especially for someone on Keene's campus, we should be able to know what happens to our faculty and our professors. If something happens to them, if they're denied re-entry into the U.S., we should know and be told about that up front. It shouldn't be something just put under the rug and to forget about. I think that's incredibly disrespectful to him, to his family, to everyone who has been a victim of being deported, denied re-entry, border patrol, everything. And I just wish there was more transparency with the entire situation from the college.
Yeah, and I think it just ultimately hits on, a piece like this hits on why we do what we do. And, this all is also paired with, our editorial discussion this week about the situation. And basically the long and short of it being that the action that was taken against this professor was unequivocally wrong, shouldn't have happened. He should be back in New Hampshire. He should be teaching his classes. He already had classes lined up to teach in the spring, and then now adjunct instructors and other people are taking over for those sections in the meantime. And it's just very eerie. I mean, his office is still listed in the directory in the first floor of the Science Center. It still has his name card and everything. And it's just, I spoke about it, in the editorial discussion, talking about how it's, unfortunately reminiscent of times before where you talk about disappearing people. And, that's not a thing that could necessarily happen as easily with someone who has a position like a professor at a college and, in the era of social media and, the internet. But at the same time, it does feel like when so few people know about something like this that it just kind of, he was here one day and then gone the next. And then we're just supposed to act like, that's normal in some way, or just kind of move on, or just not pay attention to it and just let the powers that be figure out what the best outcome is in the situation. I definitely don't subscribe to that, and I think it is extremely important to, as we said in the editorial, to speak up and talk about this and why it was so important to bring it to light in the first place, and why there's been so much reaction already across campus is because people, when you talk about issues like this, for the longest time, we've already had a couple editorials about the ramping up of immigration enforcement, how it's impacted students already, and things of that nature. And I think we've already seen, we've talked about how this isn't something that's just going to happen at the big cities. It's going to come to New Hampshire. It's going to come to Keene State. And it is a very extremely unfortunate fact that it now has, in the form of this case. And it was something that I think we'd all been dreading. Just the thought of it was already bad enough. And to hear about it, certainly, and see it confirmed, and just know that someone's entire life as they built it in the United States has been uprooted as it has been, it's heartbreaking. It is. And so I think it is an extremely important thing. Along with being the most important story of the year so far, I think this editorial is certainly the most important that we published this year. And everyone should look into this more, because it's tragedy, I think.
Well, and if I can add, we're looking into this more.
Yeah.
As we included in this first sort of breaking article, this is not the end of this story. There's still a lot of questions that are left unanswered, and just different sort of angles and people who have been impacted by what's happened that we want to understand. We want to understand where all these pieces fit together, and so we're going to continue to investigate, because, again, that's what we have to do.
It's also scary that if we never did any digging, this might have never gotten out around campus. I think it's terrifying that someone's entire existence here in New Hampshire and their entire life can just be blipped out of existence like that. It's absolutely terrifying and horrible, and I do wish the college publicized it and came out immediately about it, but I'm glad that we were able to actually get the word out there so people can be aware of what's happening.
Yeah, but I do agree that, at the very least, we will do our best to continue, reporting on this and finding out more of the facts, because really this is just the beginning of this very much developing story, to which we don't know many, many answers to, but we will find those out one way or another. So keep your eyes peeled, is all I have to say. But with that being said, the top story in news, because this was all to do with the breaking news, but the top story in news was a story from our photo editor, Xander, and it's about where the money from parking citations and just the revenue from buying parking passes and things like that goes, what it goes toward. And some of the key facts of this story are that since the start of July 2025, Keene State has gotten more than $500,000 in parking revenue. I think a much smaller number of that being citations. But it all does sort of get, not recycled, but it goes back into parking services in terms of like student attendant salaries, a portion of campus safety salaries, whatever things that they have to do relating to parking enforcement. It kind of just goes back into the system. And, the story also talks about why it's important for them, or, what they think in terms of why they think it's important to enforce these parking rules, to make sure that people who are purchasing permits get the spots that they need when they need them, versus those who don't have them or park in an incorrect lot or something like that. But it's a question that I think a lot of people have thought about, especially given there are other campuses which allocate the revenue differently in terms of where their parking money goes toward. So I was glad that we were able to sort of get the hard numbers on this and get to the bottom of something that I think many students have thought about.
Yeah, and I think this story is interesting because if I remember correctly, it all started from a question that Xander raised at one of our meetings, like, where do the parking tickets go? And then it just went on from there. It does make you wonder sometimes where the money goes for things that you just don't know about or really even think about. It just raises a lot of questions in your mind, and I know that I was surprised when Xander told us about over $500K in parking revenue. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but that was much higher than whatever was in my mind, and it was just crazy to me.
Yeah, I was also, that you got to figure there's only so many students at the college in the first place. We're pretty small, but yeah, 500,000 is fairly substantial. I mean, I I would be curious to know like what other colleges of a similar size use that same like sort of revenue stream for, and how they divide that up, because I don't know, that could be something for the college to look into, especially given the fact that, as has been plenty discussed on this show, you know, budget is a difficult thing for uh, public higher ed right now, and so I mean, I would imagine that some level of evaluation probably does happen with that on somewhat of a regular basis, in terms of, let's divert this here and, make sure that this is getting X amount and whatever. But yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what sort of the difference in like thought processes is for why certain schools do it one way and why we do it a different way.
Yeah, and then I just pull it up now to get the numbers on the citations, but a little over $25,000 have been paid in citations, but there's $46,000 in citations issued. So there's kind of a big gap between those that have been paid and those that are issued. So I thought that was also a really interesting aspect of the story. But I think overall this kind of goes to show one of like the cooler things that we do at the Equinox is just like if you're a student, you have a question, you can just answer that question. You can, talk to people that have the answers. You can get other people's opinions on what you found from those answers. And you can just really, there's no question that, will go unanswered. And, you kind of are empowered to find that out yourself. And sort of, Xander got to see that through his reporting on this, which was really cool, I think. But yeah. That being said, we can move on to the region and state top story, which comes to us from the Keene Sentinel's Noah Diedrich. And this is a Keene State specific story, which is always good to see in region, to get that local angle. But it's about something that we had also been reporting on a little bit, which is Keene State. But the recent development is that Keene State has canceled the call program spring session. So the call program is sort of extended learning opportunities for retired community members in particular, so older members of the community who want to sort of continue to take classes in some fashion, sort of like a community education thing where you can learn a thing or two from lecturers, while not having to actually formally go back to school or anything like that. So it's kind of one of those programs that's really a bridge between the college and the community. And with this, they had hoped for a little bit that the spring session would not be canceled, but it was as a result of the staff member who was in charge of supervising the program being part of the staff reductions that we saw in the fall, and then not being able to find a new person basically to take on that role. And I think the numbers were at least a few hundred people participating in the call program, which they said was a drop from pre-pandemic levels, certainly. But the hope, I guess, according to this reporting, the college spokesperson said that they do hope to resume the call program in the fall with a part-time coordinator. But this kind of goes to show sort of that cause and effect with the budget cuts, the staff reductions. And we have heard quite a bit about call just in the past few months, because it is a very important program to many in the community.
Yeah, and when we reported on this a few weeks ago, we got to talk to 3 members of the call program, and I think it is very disheartening now that we know the spring semester has been canceled. I remember one quote from the article in particular where one of the participants said that the program was the reason that she sat down in Keene, and that she might not stay here if it doesn't continue, because that was her reason for being here in the first place. I'm hopeful that a fall program will be in the works, but it's never guaranteed, especially with the budget cuts, and you never really know. I hope they're able to do that, but I'm not going to get my hopes up on it.
Yeah, this is, I can't say I was surprised to see what ended up becoming of this term with call, but it is very sad. And I think that, I mean, the college really can't afford to lose the connection that it has with the community in Keene. That is such a valuable asset to this institution, because there's a real partnership between the college and the city, and that goes both in terms of the social aspects, in terms of education, and just having that ability to like socialize, and have a common area of interest. But it also applies to a lot of the economic factors, the revenue that local businesses see from students at Keene State, and the revenue that the college is able to bring in from programs like Call, which is nothing crazy, I'm sure, but it's there. I mean, that's a valuable portion that is sort of being lost out on by having this continued absence in the program. So I think it's absolutely essential to get that up and running again, at least in some form, for the fall, to really preserve that connection, and make sure that people like people who are valuing that experience so much that it may well be the reason that they decided to settle down in Keene, or why they're staying here. Keep those people around, because those are the people that you really, really want to have in your community, the people who really understand how meaningful their connection to the college is.
Yeah, I think, from my point of view, I think there should be as few barriers as possible to education. I do think it should be a right, and that people should have, the ability to, pursue learning opportunities in any form that they wish to, regardless of their age or walk of life. And so, naturally, I think because of, my thoughts on education, that this should continue to be a thing, that, these community members should be able to have these opportunities that they have already enjoyed for, several years now. So I think, I hope that that more will be done to make sure that a fall program could continue, and that this won't go to the wayside, because I think even if it doesn't directly impact, students, it does impact a lot of people in the community, and the community is important to the college, and the college is important to the community, and vice versa. So I think it's something that should definitely not be overlooked, certainly. But with that being said, we can get into the top story in student life, which comes to us from our staffer, Eliani. This is the Safety and Construction Job Fair. It's an annual event that happens that's to benefit students within the majors of safety and construction, to network, find internships, find job opportunities, hand out their resumes. They can get like a professional headshot there, things like that. And it's a really big event. A lot of people go to it. I think it might be required actually for majors. I do know that like having an internship at some point is required for these majors. But I think it is like a good example of sort of the positive benefits that you see. It's not just great for like the marketing side of things, but it is just like more proof in the pudding of like the programs that students go into here lend direct tangible results for local employers, and again kind of showcases why it's important to have Keene State here, why it's important to have the programs that we have, and how it just benefits the community overall.
I definitely agree. And I think it's a great opportunity for all the students involved. I know from experience it can be kind of difficult to get an internship. I think this is a really great way to just get the word out there of what they're doing and who they are. If I remember correctly, I did end up just kind of walking through it last year, and it was really cool to see. But I think it's just a great opportunity for everyone that gets to do it.
It's definitely a big to do. I've seen it, and just like table after table, and some of the stuff that like these businesses who are visiting are like giving out, like the swag they've got is really fun. So I'm a little jealous on that day, and kind of that day alone of the safety and construction majors. Big love to them. That's not my bag, but they do get cool stuff, which is the best. But I do think I think Eliani did an amazing job on this article, and I also thought it was super cool to get a little bit of perspective on the role that women have in these workplaces, because obviously traditionally these are very kind of male-dominated fields, and I think a lot of times women end up getting just crowded out, and that's sort of the status quo. That's what's expected. And so, hearing a little bit from women in that field, or people who work to promote recruitment of women into those fields, is really cool and really refreshing, because I think we definitely need more of that. And I think for any women who are in those programs here at Keene State, I hope that was an encouraging thing to be able to experience, and know that there is a space for you in your intended place of work.
Certainly, and I see, I think it, just that inclusion aspect is awesome, and I do think, with these being some of the more like flagship programs, that having, in any industry especially, but with these industries in particular, making sure that everyone has a space and a voice is super important. And I think just the reporting was great. There was like 7 sources in here, talking to both attendees, participants, employers, and I think a career advisor. Just overall, fully rounded out story, and you really get an idea of what's going on in the realm of safety and construction. So really cool stuff on that front. But moving on, got a big one here in arts and entertainment, which is a coverage of the production Color of Our Lives, which was sort of a pretty different production over from the theater department over here, which is sort of more focused on puppetry. It's how we described in the article, half acting, half puppeteering. But it's a really interesting story, and it was covered by our staffer Michael, who I think did a pretty good job of getting like the attendee perspective, as well as the director Celine Perrin, who's a professor over there, and sort of how it connected to her own life and experiences, having some sort of background with puppeteering. And I'm just a big fan of like theatrical stuff in general, so I think it was just really cool whenever they like switch things up like they do. And over the time that I've been here, almost 4 years now, just seeing all these different takes and different like stories being told, and sort of just seeing how the wonderful work that our students do over there is always really cool. And obviously the opportunity to do something nice with the paper layout design is always much appreciated.
I just want to start off by saying I think the puppetry aspect of that is really, really cool. 2 of my suite mates this semester are taking a puppetry class, which has kind of made me reevaluate my opinion on puppetry and really appreciate how difficult it is and how much time and effort goes into that kind of practice. And I think just combining real life actors and puppetry is such a cool concept in general. I've always loved it, especially in movies like The Dark Crystal and stuff like that. But that is just, I think puppetry in that kind of way in theater is so cool.
I rock with puppets. Big fan. And I also just think it's so cool whenever, a show that's like written by somebody who's actually like here, and getting to like, read the quotes from the writer of the show, Celine Perron, was so it gives so much more of like an intimate look into the production. It's one thing to do a show by someone who's totally like separated, possibly dead, whatever it may be, and you can still like feel the energy that people are bringing to it in the moment now, and that's still like a real experience. But getting to have that like additional dimension of like coverage and just it's so much more like vibrant as an experience. So I was a huge fan of that, and I also wanted to say shout out to Skylar, our senior photographer. I thought the photos she took of the show were amazing. I was like working on posting it on web this morning, and I had to like show the photos to all my friends and just be like, "Are you seeing this?" Just like the colors and like the way that it really just popped out against like the stage settings, and yeah, super fun. And as we've said probably a million times, whenever a big production comes around, it's super cool to get to do something just like different and crazy in the A&E layout. So I'm always looking forward to those, and I think this one came out very well, like all the rest.
Yeah, I just think the vibrancy of the play. I mean, the production, like it just lends itself so well to what we do in terms of our photography, and Skylar did an amazing job with that, I think, and just but it also kind of reminds me of when we did the story about the behind the scenes technical aspects of these productions and talking to the students and workers who sort of make everything happen, and it's just like kind of makes you realize when you look at things like that, just like how much effort goes into every little aspect, even the things that you wouldn't necessarily think of. Everything has to be sort of meticulously thought out and planned and make sure it goes off without a hitch, and has to be done several times over and over, and it's so like time consuming, but also ultimately I think if you ask them, very much worth it to see in that end product, how amazing the sets end up turning out, and how it really adds to the story that's being told. So it just kind of reminded me of that as well. So shout out to everyone who was involved in this production. It's no easy feat, certainly, but very cool stuff. But with that being said, we're going to end off here with our sports top story, which is from our administrative executive editor, Jacob. Still looking for a sports editor, by the way, just saying. But this is about the indoor track and field team breaking more Keene State records. They've kind of been on a tear. There's been some standout players in particular. But this is about what happened at the New England Division III championship meet, and sort of seeing some good stuff here from the players. Tyler Belaski has been a standout. Aiden Law, who unfortunately did get injured before moving on to the next step in the meet, but still a great performance beforehand. And then senior Molly Lee McKellar. So some standouts on the team, and just not only just breaking personal records, but again setting the standard kind of for the school, or the new thing to beat. Sort of just goes to illustrate always striving for more and better things, even with a team like the track team, which is so I guess storied and like prominent in terms of Keene State teams. When you think of those who perform so well consistently every time, I think you see a lot of stuff with that, and I think it's also unique given the individual nature of the sport, but then also still operating within a team and within working with the coaching staff and things like that. So I think track has a lot of different aspects to it, the different events and things. So I think that's something that I think about a lot when I read articles like this.
Yeah, and the breaking the records part is totally awesome and good for all of them. But it's always great to draw attention to the separate performances of our students here, especially our athletes. And I had a friend who was in track and field for a couple years. I know how difficult it can be. I've seen it firsthand. And I know how much work and effort they must put into all the different activities. So I just salute them, and I'm very happy for them.
I mean, y'all know we love the track team. I think we did the math at some point, and I think track athletes are like the most. That's the program that we get the most people like coming to the Equinox from. I don't know why that is, but like, yeah, inevitably we love them, and it's definitely one of those things where we're like going through the list of stories for the week, and it's like, yeah, the track team was breaking some records. It's like, again, just the level of consistent like hard work, performance, and results is something to really marvel at. So yeah, I mean, I guess I don't have a ton more to say that we haven't already said. It's just like, congrats, keep it up, love y'all, so it goes.
And then one more shout out also to Jacob for grabbing some pictures at a very early morning practice in order to fit with the article. Since we didn't get visuals for this beforehand, the meet was an away meet, and sometimes things fall through. But coming in clutch and being up that early, I salute him for doing that. But with that being said, that's it for the news recap. So as always, I would like to extend a special shout out and thank you to the composer of the music for Noxcast, our very own Equinox alum, Zach Keenan, and to the creator of the graphic for Noxcast, our very own art director, Elijah Fisher, and to the editor of Noxcast, our very own multimedia director, Noelle Hisgen. We will be back after spring break for another probably packed news recap.